say a quick prayer as we begin this year's talk of the mission. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we give you thanks for the gift of your Son and for the gift of the cross. Help us to always be grateful for so much love and to try to receive it with a grateful and reverent heart so that we can renew our desire to be faithful to you every day. And Mother Mary, we ask you to help us as we begin this parish mission, this special year in our parish, to go with renewed devotion and love, to get to know and love God. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Well, thank you for coming. And I think, first and foremost, we should be grateful for this opportunity to think about our lives and to try to be proactive in a way of responding to God's love during this time. There is always in our lives as disciples of Christ a need for renewal, but now more than ever. As I said yesterday at Mass, if anyone wasn't here, and as a refresher, there is a particular need for direction in this year, 2020. And I think we would agree that it is about time that we choose to find the direction that Lord is giving us, rather than just letting society or the media dictate what we think and how we feel. That's what we are proposing, inviting all of you to this special year in our parish. The light shines in the darkness as a sort of journey, an intentional direction to go to God. And we will turn our attention in this first semester to God the Father, the next semester, God the Son, and finally after Easter, the Holy Spirit. Around that time, we hope to complete the beatification of our church. And we begin this journey this year with our parish mission. Parish mission is a short journey, a sort of mini retreat, if you will. And as in any journey, we begin somewhere, and then we hope to finish in a different destination. As in any retreat, we must hope for growth, for something new, for some change. So hopefully, we will all be able together, as we pray together, as we reflect together, to discern and see what God wants to show to each one of us personally, but also as a parish community. So let's begin this reflection by talking a little bit about the context in which we are trying to find God's direction. The context, needless to say, is a very strange year. Strange not only because there are new things that no one expected. The virus is new. The kind of social unrest that we're seeing is also new in many of its manifestations. There are new things, but also, and I want to highlight mostly the other part, there are realities that were already there in many ways and that now are coming to the surface. And I want to mention just two, one very briefly, and I want to spend more time in the second one. The first one that is very evident is lack of joy and lack of hope. Very recent studies tell us that 25% of Americans recently have contemplated suicide. That's hard even to grasp. There has been an increase in the past months of 40% in the use of antidepressants. And that's just in this part of the city. Lack of joy and hope. The second point is polarization. We are more polarized than ever. Now, again, it's not that there was no polarization, but the way in which this is manifesting itself is coming to a new level. Everywhere. Talk about politics, it is very hard to have a conversation, a reasonable, rational conversation with someone who thinks differently, who belongs to a different party, etc. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the church. The polarization in the church has reached levels that we never thought we would see. And there is a great unevenness in the church. We really think and see things in very, very different ways. And very often, it is hard for us to grasp what other people, the others, might see or might believe. I'm going to take some information from a very thorough book published just 2 years ago, so pre-2020. We all have probably heard of a depressing small number of some 30% of Catholics who actually believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. That made the Catholic Mass. But there is more. Only 32% of Catholics attend weekly Mass. Now that's surprising. But then 9 in 10 Catholics say, and these are very professional studies, say that they can disagree with some aspects of church teaching and still be loyal to the church. So no one feels, if this is your point of view, that you are doing something wrong. It's being a Catholic. You can do that. 78% of Catholics are in favor of contraception, 67% in favor of gay marriage, 72% in favor of married priests, and 68% in favor of women's ordination. This is what a sociologist has described by these words: interpretive autonomy. Interpretive autonomy. And the idea is simple. We might believe that lived experience and personal conscience confers competence to decide. So authority has very little weight in our daily lives. What really matters is my own lived experience and then the judgment of my conscience. Interpretive autonomy. The interesting thing that I want to point out here, or the most important thing I think, is that this interpretive autonomy, this approach to things, to life, to problems, to doctrine, to liturgy, to morals, etc., can affect people on every single spectrum of the church. To use categories that at times are misused, people on the left or on the right, conservative or liberals, people who like this pope or that pope. The attitude behind many of our thoughts might actually be the same. I think I know better. Question: can we obey if we disagree? Parenthesis, I'm not talking about someone who commands something that is clearly sinful. In that case, we disobey because obedience does not really exist. When someone in the public area or in the church commands or has a disposition or a law that is sinful, then there's no need to obey. Obedience does not exist. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about situations in which we might disagree. Should we obey? What we're seeing is that tendencies that to some degree are valid are becoming extremes. Are we in some way, and I'm including myself in the examination of conscience, are we in some way affected by this? Question: in the most firm convictions that we have, whether about the situation of the church or about the pandemic or social unrest, etc., how much of that belief, of that passionate conviction, comes to us from things we have read or videos we have seen? How much is just us? How much is Facebook? How much is Twitter? How much is YouTube? Etc. At times, those different outlets seem to have more effective, practical weight in our way of thinking feeling than God's word and obedience to the church. So, do we know better? Now, data, scientific arguments, one way or another, information, news, blogs, all of that can be helpful, can be, not necessary, can be helpful. But those things do not determine our discernment. God, His Word, and His guidance in the church have to be the light that guides our steps. In this complicated context, when things are so confusing, there is one clear and urgent need to go to God the Father. I'm going to talk about that right now. One very simple question for all of us. Today, are we closer to God today than 7 months ago? Think about that. Don't answer right away. Think about it. Am I closer to God the Father today than 7 months ago? We've been all going through a sort of journey which really is a kind of exodus in many ways. We did not choose this journey. We probably, most likely, don't enjoy most of it. And in many ways, it is a going through the desert. A desert in which we have experienced different kinds of fasts. You, almost all of you, had to fast from the Eucharist for some time. And some parts of the world, they are still in that situation. It wasn't that long, now that we can look back. But it was still painful and strange and confusing. Fasting from the Eucharist. We had to fast from friends that we could not see for too long, or from family, so from our parish community. None of that is good in itself. No one could say that. However, the absence of good things and good people becomes an occasion for a renewed longing, for breaking down those layers of routine and complacency that many times impede God's grace to be effective and to penetrate and reach our heart. These things are not good, but they can become an occasion for purification, a preparation for something better. In our first reading today, we heard that at some point the people of Israel repented and they asked for forgiveness. But it was a very specific petition for forgiveness. They said, "We have sinned by complaining against the Lord." We have sinned by complaining against the Lord. And perhaps, if it is the case, this could become part of our humble prayer. Maybe I have sinned by complaining. The people of Israel had to come to accept that that journey was going to be long, longer than they were expecting. We also must accept that this journey, this exodus, this strange time, is already much longer than what we were expecting, and that we don't know when it will end. It's not what we chose, but it is what we have in front of us. There are so many things that we cannot change. But there is one thing that we can certainly change: our interior attitude, our spiritual disposition to whatever comes to our lives. We can learn here an important lesson from Mother Teresa of Calcutta. The saying that the whole world came to know as a smiley defender of the poorest of the poor experienced a very long and painful death. She felt far from God. It was agony for her. So let me read just one of the many testimonies that we have in her private letters that are really, really painful just to read. This is one of them. She was writing, to a priest asking for direction. Since the year 49 or 50, so she's writing some 11 years after the beginning of this experience. It's 11 years. Since 49 or 50, this terrible sense of loss, this untold darkness, this loneliness, this continual longing for God, which gives me that pain down in my heart. Darkness is such that I really do not see, neither with my mind nor with my reason. That place of God in my soul is blank. There is no God in me. He is not there. Heaven, souls, why are these just words which mean nothing to me? My very life seems so contradictory. The torture and pain I can't explain. I would imagine that for most of us, whatever darkness, whatever pain we felt during these months or these years, probably does not come close to the terrible suffering that we can feel in the words of Mother Teresa. And yet, whatever it is, we all have experienced some of the bitterness of the desert, and we need to as well be reverent with that. It's been hard, and we have to accept that and embrace that cross, which of course is different for each one of us. The question is, what can we do now? Where can we go? Can we find peace and joy in our lives? Or do we need to in some way get rid of this desert, whatever that is, first, so that we can finally experience some peace and some joy? Shall we continue to long for what has become the most cherished ideal, the going back to normal? Is that really a necessary condition for peace, for being close to God? Where can we find God today? And the truth is that God is not a God of circumstances. God is real, and He is with us just in the desert as in a fruitful land. He is not in the sand of the desert, just as He is not in the trees. He is God. He is our Father, and He is everywhere and at every time. And we need to find Him there, wherever we are. As the psalm says, with so much wisdom, be still and know that I am God. Under the guidance of a spiritual director, Mother Teresa was able to find joy, but not when her troubles and temptations ended, in the midst of her darkness. But at some point, she did experience a change, and she wrote to this priest, for the first time in these 11 years, this is a strong phrase, for the first time in these 11 years, I have come to love the darkness. For I believe that it is a part, a very, very small part of Jesus' darkness and pain on earth. For you have taught me to accept it as a spiritual side of my work. Today, I felt a deep joy that Jesus can't go anymore through the agony, but that He wants to go through it in me. More than ever, I surrender myself to Him. Yes, more than ever, I will be at His disposal. Now, we should not surrender to the problems of our time. We should not surrender our reason. We have to think. We must have an opinion. We must be critical, of course. But before all of that does not work if we do not surrender to God. If we don't choose to try to find Him today, whether we're feeling great or not, in the darkness, if there is still darkness, accepting that we cannot fully control the circumstances, the length, and all the other aspects of this desert. But again, we can choose to have the right attitude. We can choose, and this is a loving advice that I give, not to pay so much attention to what so many loud people say. We can choose to find God in a desert, because God is calling us to Himself out of the desert. And with this I come to my last point. The experience of God the Father and of His love for us, but also of His pain for our distractions and doubts, betrayals, and His persistence in finding ways to attract us to Himself is expressed very beautifully through the prophet Hosea. I'm going to read a few verses. By the way, at the end, you're going to receive a handout with some of these texts. Just pay attention to these very beautiful words. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. So let me make just a few comments, and feel free to draw any parallel, if there is any, to your lives. Out of Egypt I called my son. The call came to those who were in Egypt. It did not start when they were free. The call was to become free. It began in Egypt, and God was already there. The fathers of the church see the mysterious prefiguration of God, of Christ's action in Egypt, symbolized in that river, and then as soon as they left, in becoming bread for them. But Israel wanted securities. They wanted to know what was going to happen. They wanted to plan and control. And so they looked for gods that will act more quickly and more spectacular. They had no patience for a patient God, and they kept sacrificing to the idols. But as painful as that was for God the Father, He never stopped loving. He never stopped calling. He never stops loving, and He never stops calling. St. Jerome sees in the words, or hears in the words of the prophet, the voice of Jesus sent by the Father in a beautiful commentary. And as a lover of humankind, I will draw them to believing with cords of love. But they thought that my light yoke was heavy, and I bent toward them, leaving the kingdom of heaven so that I may eat with them, having assumed the human form. Or rather, I gave them my body as food. I was both food and table companion. The Father's compassion is growing warm and tender. This is true as well today. His compassion is growing warm and tender. He will not give up. And His main concern is our heart. We are not directly responsible for what happens in Congress or in the Vatican or Twitter, but we are directly responsible before anything else or before anyone else for what happens in our heart. And from there, from that place, a place that at times resembles the desert in this time of confusion, the Father is calling us again to Himself. And this is what conversion is. Many times when we hear the word conversion, we immediately think about action items. What do I need to do? What penance is it going to be imposed in me so that I can walk in my conversion? And yes, of course, there is some aspect of our action. The conversion is first and foremost that loving call from God to turn to Himself. Conversion. Turn to me. And this, with God's grace, we can do. And this is the root of everything else. As frustrated, or different, or happy, or confused as we may be, hopefully tonight we can join in one single resolution which can be expressed in just a few words. I will go back to my Father. More deep and more loving, go to our Father. This is the full verse in the Gospel of Luke. I will set out and go back to my Father and say to Him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. And perhaps, as the Israelites, we could say, I have sinned against you by complaining. Maybe I have sinned by judging my brothers and sisters, relatives, people that I don't even know on the streets. Maybe I have sinned by disobeying, by thinking always that I know better. Or maybe I have sinned when I did not look for you, Lord, in the desert, when I keep delaying some simple acts of love, hoping for that time when the circumstances will lead me to you. Or maybe I have sinned by doubting your love and care when things are dark. But no matter what, today we can go back to our Father. We all need conversion. We all need conversion. We all need to turn towards God. This semester, we're going to offer a number of things that can help us to grow closer to God, to encounter His love and mercy again, and to grow in our conversion. There will be some retreats, including some weekend retreats. We will have a monthly, third Thursday, solemn hour of adoration, praying Vespers, which will be an occasion to do some Bible studies as well by smaller groups. We are preparing a number of materials, prayer materials, reading materials for all of you to do at home or to do in your communities. Of course, we're beginning today with a parish mission, which also launches a 40 hours of adoration, which is a wonderful occasion for us to pray that we can go back to our Father more loving, more faithful, to pray for our fellow parishioners, that this can truly be a time of grace, to pray for the world, to pray for the church. So hopefully you have signed up, and if not, there are still some empty spots. But now, let us really turn our attention in these upcoming months and today to God our Father, whose compassion, I would dare to say, is probably growing warm and tender right now, as He sees some of His children here being open to turning to Him more deeply. So I invite you to, in order to have a very fruitful parish mission, to reflect and pray about this tonight and tomorrow. At the entrance of the church, and actually I think Grace and Phil are going to be helping with this, but there are some handouts that I ask you to take it home so that you can pray. Some of the texts that I've used in order to read some of the biblical texts will be there. There are a few questions that can guide you in your reflection. But please make sure you spend some time tonight and or tomorrow thinking about this. All of this will lead us to tomorrow's meditation on Christ, who is calling us to Himself to renew our friendship and discipleship and to share His life with others. So this is it for tonight. We'll continue tomorrow at 6:30. We'll pray the rosary tomorrow. tomorrow is the last day of the Rosary Crusade. It's a meaningful day, our day of sorrows, praying to Mary together. And after the Rosary, we'll continue with our meditation. So again, thank you for coming, and let us close in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Father of love, give us an open heart. Give us all the graces that we need to go back to you with more love. To be humble and recognize the times we have not loved you as we should. To renew our faith, our trust in you. To know that you are a good Father